November 8, 1942. The coastal winds off Oran, Algeria carried the acrid smell of burning fuel across the harbour as Oberst Wilhelm Hauser stepped carefully through the wreckage of an American landing craft. His boots crunched on spent brass casings that carpeted the beach like golden sand. Operation Torch had ended here just hours earlier, leaving behind the detritus of amphibious assault, abandoned equipment, shattered crates, and one particular weapon that would change everything Hauser thought he understood about automatic fire. The machine gun sat mounted on its tripod, still aimed toward the hills where German and Vichy French forces had retreated. Its barrel gleamed dull in the afternoon sun, a massive piece of American iron that looked almost obscenely large compared to the refined weapons Hauser had commanded throughout his career. White stenciling on the receiver read, "Caliber 50, HB M2. Around it lay a scene of mechanical violence, empty ammunition boxes, a belt of cartridges nearly as thick as a man's thumb, and brass casings, the size of a child's finger scattered in mounds. What Oberst Hauser couldn't know as he knelt beside that weapon was that this single M2 Browning, serial number 1734928, would travel from the beaches of North Africa to the weapons testing facilities of the Third Reich, where it would force German ordnance officers to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Americans hadn't just built a heavy machine gun. They had created a weapon system so fundamentally sound, so elegantly brutal in its simplicity, that it would outlive every German equivalent by generations. This wasn't about superior materials or secret technology. It was about an engineering philosophy that prioritized sustained firepower over everything else, a philosophy Germany had never embraced and would never master before the war's end. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German military entered World War II with supreme confidence in its machine gun doctrine. For nearly 3 decades, the MG-34 and its successor, the MG-42, had defined what automatic fire meant in modern warfare. These were general-purpose machine guns, weapons designed to serve multiple roles: light machine gun on a bipod, heavy machine gun on a tripod, anti-aircraft gun on specialized mounts. German doctrine called them universal weapons, and their performance seemed to justify that designation. The MG-42 particularly had earned mythical status among both German troops and their enemies. Its rate of fire, between 1,200 and 1,500 rounds per minute, created a distinctive tearing sound that Allied soldiers learned to fear. The weapon could saw through wood, tear apart sandbags, and shred infantry caught in the open. Its quick-change barrel system allowed sustained fire that kept enemy forces pinned for devastating lengths of time. To German ordnance officers, the MG-42 represented the pinnacle of machine gun development, a weapon without peer. But the MG-42 fired the standard 7.92mm Mauser cartridge, the same round used in German rifles. It was lethal against personnel, certainly, but it lacked the raw destructive power needed for certain battlefield roles. German forces used larger caliber weapons for specialized purposes. The 13mm MG-131 served as an anti-aircraft and anti-vehicle weapon, adapted from a Rheinmetall design originally created in 1930. The 20mm cannons served aboard aircraft and in anti-aircraft roles. Yet between the standard machine gun and the cannon, German forces had a gap, a missing weapon that could deliver sustained heavy fire against light vehicles, aircraft, and fortified positions without the weight and complexity of autocannons. Americans had no such gap. They had the .50 caliber, and by 1942 it was everywhere in their arsenal. When Oberst Hauser examined the captured Browning on that Algerian beach, he was looking at a weapon system that had been refined over 23 years of continuous development. The M2 had its origins in the final year of the First World War, when John Moses Browning, already famous for his automatic weapons designs, created a heavy machine gun chambered for a new .50 caliber cartridge specifically requested by the American military. That first version appeared too late for combat in 1918, but the Army recognized its potential immediately. Through the 1920s and 30s, the design underwent constant refinement. The water-cooled barrel gave way to heavy air-cooled versions. The rate of fire was reduced from over 600 rounds per minute to between 450 and 600, improving controllability and barrel life. The headspace and timing adjustments were simplified. Feed mechanisms became more reliable. By 1933, the final version emerged, the M2HB, heavy barrel. This was the weapon Hauser now studied with growing interest. The first thing any German officer noticed about the 50 cal was its size. The complete gun weighed 84 pounds without its tripod, more than twice the weight of an MG42. The tripod added another 44 pounds. The ammunition was proportionally massive. Each 50 BMG cartridge weighed nearly 4 ounces, compared to less than 1 ounce for a German 7.92mm round. A single 100-round belt of 50 caliber ammunition weighed 35 pounds. Everything about the weapon system seemed excessive by German standards, almost wastefully heavy. Yet Hauser noted something curious as he examined the abandoned position. The American crew had maintained an impressive volume of fire before withdrawing. Empty ammunition cans surround the gun, at least 20 of them, suggesting over 2,000 rounds expended. The barrel showed heat discoloration, but no obvious damage. The weapon sat ready to fire, simply left behind in the chaos of retreat. No broken parts littered the position. No tools suggested emergency repairs. The Americans had used this enormous machine gun extensively under combat conditions, then abandoned it intact because they couldn't carry it during their withdrawal. Hauser ordered his men to secure the weapon carefully. Orders had already come down from higher command. Any interesting American equipment was to be preserved for technical evaluation. This 50 caliber certainly qualified. Within days, it was crated and shipped to Kummersdorf, the Wehrmacht's primary weapons testing facility south of Berlin, where German engineers would spend months discovering exactly why the Americans built their heavy machine guns so differently. The gun arrived at Kummersdorf in early December 1942, accompanied by over 5,000 rounds of captured ammunition and several intact ammunition cans with their original packing materials. Hauptmann Friedrich Keller, an ordnance officer with extensive experience testing captured weapons, conducted the initial examination. His preliminary report, dated December 14, 1942, reveals the first German impressions of American heavy machine gun philosophy. The weapon's construction demonstrates American industrial principles consistently observed in their other equipment, Keller wrote. Where German engineering pursues mechanical elegance and multi-role flexibility, this American weapon is designed for a single purpose, executed with absolute commitment, sustained heavy fire. Every component is oversized, overbuilt, and optimized for that singular mission. The result is a weapon that sacrifices portability and manufacturing economy for functional advantages in its intended role. German engineers measured everything. The receiver was machined from a solid block of steel, creating exceptional rigidity. The barrel, over 4 feet long, including the chamber, featured a heavy profile that resisted warping under sustained fire. The recoil mechanism used a short recoil system similar to other Browning designs, but scaled up and reinforced to handle the massive 50 caliber cartridge. The bolt weighed over 4 pounds by itself, contributing to the weapon's ability to maintain a relatively slow, controllable rate of fire. The feed system particularly impressed German observers. The M2 used a dual feed mechanism that pulled ammunition from a fabric or metal link belt entering from the left side. The system was entirely mechanical, requiring no external power, yet it operated with remarkable consistency. German engineers noted that the feed mechanism showed exceptional tolerance for dirt, moisture, and variations in ammunition quality. Tests using deliberately fouled cartridges revealed that the weapon continued functioning under conditions that would jam more sensitive designs. Then came the live fire testing, and the German evaluation shifted from technical interest to something approaching disbelief. Under controlled range conditions, Experienced German machine gunners followed the American technical manual's operating procedures exactly as translated. The weapon was mounted on its M3 tripod, loaded with a standard 100-round belt, and fired in sustained bursts. The first impression was the sound. The 50 cal didn't produce the high-pitched ripping of an MG42 or the hammering of an MG34. It created a deep, methodical pounding, each shot distinct yet following in rapid succession. The recoil was substantial but entirely manageable due to the weapon's mass and the tripod's stability. The German gunners fired their first 100-round belt in approximately 12 seconds, achieving a rate of fire around 500 rounds per minute. The weapon cycled smoothly, ejecting spent casings in a steady stream to the right side. When the belt ran out, the gun went silent, the bolt locked back automatically. The gunners attached a new belt and resumed firing. Another 100 rounds in 12 seconds, then another, and another. After 600 rounds, fired in sustained bursts with only brief pauses to reload, the German test crew stopped to inspect the weapon. The barrel was hot, certainly, glowing faintly in the dimming afternoon light, but the gun showed no signs of malfunction. The headspace remained correct. The timing was perfect. The feed mechanism continued operating flawlessly. Lieutenant Hans Weber, who had commanded an MG42 team in Russia before being transferred to testing duties, filed an observation that would echo through subsequent German reports. This American weapon does not achieve the high cyclic rate of our general-purpose machine guns, Weber wrote, but that lower rate is clearly intentional, not a limitation. The reduced fire rate allows the heavy barrel to absorb and dissipate heat more effectively, enabling sustained fire far beyond what our weapons can achieve. After 600 rounds, our MG42 would require a barrel change. This American gun appears barely stressed. The engineering philosophy is clear: sacrifice rate of fire to enable continuous operation. In a sustained firefight, the weapon that keeps firing defeats the weapon that fires faster but must pause frequently. The testing continued over the following days. German crews pushed the 50 cal through increasingly demanding trials. They fired 2,000-round belts with only brief pauses to reload. They subjected the weapon to mud, sand, and ice water, then resumed firing. They fired at maximum rate until the barrel glowed cherry red, then continued firing. The M2 absorbed everything without complaint. The heavy barrel proved to be the key innovation. German machine guns used relatively thin, quick-change barrels that heated rapidly, requiring regular replacement during sustained fire. The MG42's barrel, for instance, weighed about 4.5 pounds and was designed to be changed every 200 to 300 rounds during continuous fire. The American 50 cal barrel weighed nearly 30 pounds and was never intended to be changed in the field. Instead of multiple thin barrels, the Americans had created one massive barrel that could sustain fire for thousands of rounds before overheating became critical. This represented a fundamental philosophical difference. German doctrine assumed that sustained fire would occur in controlled bursts, with barrel changes enabling extended engagements. The American approach assumed that once heavy fire became necessary, it might need to continue for extended periods without interruption. The 50 cal was built to fire continuously until either the target was destroyed or ammunition was exhausted, whichever came first. Hauptmann Keller supervised a definitive test on December 22nd. A German test crew fired 5,000 rounds through the captured 50 cal over a 90-minute period, pausing only to reload ammunition belts. The barrel temperature was monitored continuously using optical pyrometers. It reached over 600 degrees Celsius but stabilized there, the mass of the heavy barrel acting as a thermal reservoir that absorbed heat faster than firing generated it. After 5,000 rounds, the weapon was inspected thoroughly. The barrel showed no measurable erosion. The chamber dimensions remained within specification. The headspace was still correct. The weapon was immediately loaded and fired again without incident. No German machine gun in our inventory could endure such treatment, Keller concluded in his report. Our weapons are marvels of engineering efficiency, optimized for weight, flexibility, and rapid deployment. This American weapon is optimized for a single criterion: it must fire continuously, without failure, until the battle is decided. For that specific mission, the American design is demonstrably superior to anything we have produced. The ballistic performance testing revealed additional advantages. The 50 caliber BMG cartridge, firing a 700-grain projectile at approximately 2,800 feet per second, delivered over 12,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. This was more than 4 times the energy of the German 7.92mm Mauser round. The implications were immediately obvious to German observers. Against personnel, the 50 cal was devastating beyond any tactical requirement. A single round could incapacitate multiple targets if they were in line. Soldiers hit by 50 caliber fire simply ceased to exist as combat-effective units, regardless of where the round struck. Against vehicles, the 50 cal could penetrate nearly an inch of armor at typical combat ranges, sufficient to destroy most light vehicles, trucks, and half-tracks. Against aircraft, the heavy round retained lethality at ranges where lighter machine guns became ineffective. Most significantly, the 50 cal excelled against fortified positions. Concrete, brick, and sandbags that provided adequate protection against rifle-caliber weapons offered little defense against sustained 50 caliber fire. German troops in Russia had learned to fear Soviet heavy machine guns for this reason, watching their defensive positions literally disintegrate under sustained fire from DSHK guns. The American 50 cal offered similar capabilities with better reliability and simpler logistics. German forces had no direct equivalent. The 13mm MG-131 might seem comparable on paper, but that weapon had never been reliable or widely deployed. It suffered from feeding problems, overheating, and excessive complexity. Production remained limited, and field units rarely encountered it. The 15mm MG-151, developed later in the war, showed more promise but arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to matter strategically. Germany had simply never prioritized heavy machine gun development the way American forces had. The test reports began circulating through German ordnance offices in early 1943. The conclusions were straightforward but troubling. American forces possessed a heavy machine gun that outperformed German weapons in sustained fire, reliability, and destructive effect. Moreover, the Americans had standardized this weapon across their entire military, mounting it on vehicles, aircraft, fortifications, and infantry positions. Every American infantry battalion included 6 M2 heavy machine guns in its weapons company. Every American tank and half-track carried at least 150 cal. American aircraft bristled with them. The Germans were confronting not just a superior weapon, but a comprehensive heavy firepower system that they had no equivalent of matching. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The psychological impact on German troops encountering the 50 cal in combat reinforced what the testing data revealed. Reports from North Africa, where American forces first engaged in significant numbers, consistently mentioned the devastating effect of American heavy machine gun fire. German infantry found that positions providing adequate protection against rifle and light machine gun fire offered no safety against 50 caliber rounds that punched through sandbags, splintered heavy timber, and fragmented concrete. Lieutenant Karl Richter, an infantry company commander in the 21st Panzer Division, described an engagement near Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where his platoon attempted to advance against an American defensive position. "We had successfully engaged American infantry positions on many occasions," Richter recalled in a letter intercepted by sensors, using our standard tactics, MG-42 teams providing covering fire while rifle squads advanced by bounds. But this position was different. The Americans had heavy machine guns, probably 50 calibers based on the sound, and they simply destroyed our cover. Trees we sheltered behind were cut down, stone walls were reduced to gravel. When we moved behind a disabled truck, the 50 cal punched through the engine block and killed 2 men on the opposite side. We had to withdraw. There was nothing to hide behind. Panzer crews reported similar experiences. The 50 cal's ability to penetrate light armor made it a genuine threat to reconnaissance vehicles, half-tracks, and even the side and rear armor of medium tanks. American tank destroyers mounting multiple 50 cals created fields of fire that German light vehicles simply could not survive. The psychological effect was cumulative. German troops learned that American heavy machine guns controlled space in ways that German weapons did not. By mid-1943, additional captured 50 cals had reached German testing facilities, including several different variants. The standard ground version was joined by aircraft machine guns, which demonstrated even higher rates of fire, and specialized anti-aircraft versions with extended barrels. Each confirmed the fundamental lesson. American heavy machine gun design prioritized sustained firepower delivery, and that prioritization yielded tactical advantages that German weapons could not match. Dr. Heinrich Müller, a civilian engineer from Rheinmetall brought in to evaluate captured weapons, provided perhaps the most technically sophisticated analysis in a report dated July 19, 1943. The American M2 represents mature industrial design rather than innovative technology, Müller wrote. Every component reflects decades of refinement toward a specific goal: maximum sustained firepower with minimum maintenance. Where German design culture values mechanical elegance and multi-role capability, American design culture values brute functional effectiveness. The result is a weapon system that is heavier, more expensive, and less flexible than German equivalents, but decisively superior in its primary mission. The Americans have accepted trade-offs that German doctrine would reject, and those trade-offs have created a weapon that dominates the battlefield in its weight class. The Germans attempted several responses to the 50 cal threat, none entirely successful. Anti-tank rifles, already declining in effectiveness, were sometimes pressed into counter-sniper roles against American 50 cal positions, but this was an improvised solution at best. The 20mm anti-aircraft cannons could suppress American heavy machine guns, but deploying such weapons required moving them into direct fire positions, exposing them to counterfire. German infantry simply lacked organic weapons that could effectively engage entrenched 50 cals at typical combat ranges. Some German units attempted to capture and employ American 50 caliber machine guns, but this proved problematic. The weapons were extremely heavy, requiring their specialized tripods and ammunition that German logistics couldn't reliably provide. More fundamentally, German tactics weren't designed around heavy machine gun employment. The Wehrmacht's infantry doctrine centered on the general-purpose machine gun as the primary infantry weapon, with rifle squads supporting the MG team. The 50 cal required different tactical thinking: permanent defensive positions, deliberate emplacement, and massive ammunition expenditure. German forces attempting to use captured 50 cals often found them more burdensome than beneficial. The testing at Kummersdorf continued through 1944 as more examples reached German hands. Some came from the Italian theatre, others from France after D-Day, and several from the Eastern Front where Soviet forces used American Lend-Lease equipment. Each weapon confirmed what the first testing had revealed. The M2 Browning was extraordinarily reliable, almost absurdly so by German standards. Test crews fired tens of thousands of rounds through individual weapons, with minimal maintenance beyond occasional cleaning and lubrication. The guns simply kept functioning. Oberst Max Dietrich, who supervised much of the later testing, attempted to quantify the reliability difference in a report dated October 1944. Our testing suggests that the American M2 can sustain continuous operations, exceeding 10,000 rounds before requiring significant maintenance, Dietrich wrote. Our MG-42, despite being an excellent weapon, typically requires armorer attention after 2,000 to 3,000 rounds due to parts wear. The American weapon achieves this reliability through oversized, over-engineered components that provide enormous safety margins. A German engineer would consider such design wasteful and inelegant. The battlefield suggests otherwise. Reliability is its own form of elegance. The comparison extended beyond mere mechanical reliability to encompass the entire support system. American .50 caliber ammunition was produced to remarkably consistent specifications, ensuring reliable function even when mixing ammunition from different manufacturers. German 7.92 mm ammunition, while generally good, showed more variation between production facilities, occasionally causing feeding issues in weapons with tight tolerances. The American logistical approach also differed fundamentally. Where German forces often struggled with ammunition supply, American units seemed to have inexhaustible stocks of .50 caliber rounds. This reflected different operational philosophies. German doctrine emphasized ammunition conservation, careful fire discipline, and precisely aimed shots. American doctrine, particularly for heavy weapons, emphasized overwhelming firepower. If a position needed to be suppressed, American commanders preferred to bury it under thousands of rounds rather than risk casualties through conservative fire. This profligacy with ammunition shocked German observers, but it was enabled by industrial capacity that Germany simply could not match. American factories produced over 3 billion rounds of .50 caliber ammunition during the war years. That's billion with a B. German production of 13 mm ammunition, the closest equivalent, totaled perhaps 50 million rounds across the entire war. The disparity wasn't just in production capacity, but in strategic vision. The Americans had recognized heavy machine guns as fundamental infantry weapons and committed industrial resources accordingly. Germany had treated heavy machine guns as specialized weapons for specific roles, never achieving true integration into combined arms doctrine. By late 1944, German forces were encountering .50 caliber machine guns in overwhelming numbers across every front. In Normandy, American infantry companies used them to create interlocking fields of fire that made German counterattacks suicidal. In Italy, .50 cals mounted in fortified positions controlled key terrain, forcing German units into costly flanking movements. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces equipped with American Lend-Lease .50 cals demonstrated the same tactical advantages. The Germans had no effective answer beyond artillery and air support, and by late 1944, they possessed neither in sufficient quantities. The weapon's versatility particularly troubled German tactical planners. The same M2 that served as a ground weapon could be mounted on vehicles with minimal modification. American half-tracks typically carried one or more .50 cals, creating mobile firepower platforms that could suppress German positions while infantry maneuvered. American tanks used .50 cals for local defense and infantry suppression, roles that German tanks handled poorly or not at all. The ubiquity of the weapon meant that American units at all levels possessed organic heavy firepower that German units could only obtain through specialized attachments. General Major Franz Halder, examining captured American tactical manuals at the Army High Command, noted this fundamental difference in a memorandum dated November 1944. The Americans have created a tactical system where heavy machine gun fire is assumed available at every level from squad to army, Halder wrote. Their infantry squads train to operate under covering fire from .50 caliber weapons. Their vehicles are designed with .50 caliber mounts integrated from inception. Their defensive positions incorporate .50 caliber sectors of fire as standard procedure. This represents a fundamentally different approach to infantry firepower than our doctrine envisions. We emphasize the general-purpose machine gun as the primary infantry weapon, expecting it to fulfill multiple roles adequately. The Americans provide specialized weapons for specialized roles, accepting the logistical complexity in exchange for tactical superiority in each role. Given their industrial advantages, this approach is rational. Given our limitations, we cannot replicate it, even if we wish to. Some German attempts to develop equivalent weapons emerged in the war's final years, but none reached meaningful production. The MG-151, a 15 mm heavy machine gun, showed promise in testing but arrived too late and in too few numbers. Plans for a dedicated heavy machine gun based on scaled-up MG-42 mechanisms never progressed beyond prototype stage. Germany's industrial base, increasingly devastated by Allied bombing and strangled by material shortages, simply could not support new weapons programs that diverted resources from existing production. The irony was profound. German ordnance officers had identified the American heavy machine gun as a superior weapon system as early as late 1942. They understood precisely why it outperformed German equivalents and what advantages it conferred on American forces. Yet this knowledge proved useless. Understanding a problem and possessing the capability to solve it are entirely different challenges. Germany lacked the industrial capacity, the raw materials, the logistical infrastructure, and most critically, the time to develop and field competitive heavy machine guns in meaningful numbers. The .50 caliber's legacy extended far beyond World War II. When the conflict ended in May 1945, the M2 Browning was already 27 years old in basic design, yet it remained in frontline service with American forces. It would continue serving through Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq, and into the 21st century. As of the present day, over 90 years after its initial development, the M2 remains in active service with militaries worldwide. It is quite possibly the longest-serving military weapon system still in frontline use, a testament to the fundamental soundness of its design. Post-war German forces, reconstituted as the Bundeswehr in the 1950s, equipped themselves with M2 Brownings supplied through American military aid. German gunners trained on the same weapon their predecessors had tested with such interest during the war, learning the same techniques and procedures. The weapon that had once represented American technological advantage now became part of NATO's standardized arsenal, serving alongside modernized German designs. The contrast between German and American machine gun philosophy became a standard case study in military engineering schools worldwide. The German approach, exemplified by the MG-42, created a flexible general-purpose weapon suitable for multiple roles. It was lighter, more portable, and could be operated by smaller crews. The American approach, exemplified by the M2, created specialized weapons optimized for specific missions. The .50 cal sacrificed portability and flexibility for sustained firepower and destructive effect. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but they reflected fundamentally different assumptions about warfare. German doctrine assumed that mobility and flexibility would prove decisive, that weapons needed to adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. American doctrine assumed that overwhelming firepower would prove decisive, that weapons needed to dominate their sectors absolutely. History rendered its judgment. In the industrial warfare of the mid-20th century, sustained firepower trumped tactical flexibility. The side that could bring overwhelming fire to bear and maintain it long enough to break enemy resistance typically prevailed. Modern military forces attempt to synthesize both approaches. Contemporary machine guns like the German MG3 or American M240 series are general-purpose weapons in the German tradition, but they're supplemented by specialized heavy weapons, including modernized M2 variants. The ideal, never fully achieved, combines German tactical flexibility with American sustained firepower. Both philosophies retain relevance because both address genuine battlefield requirements. The story of German forces testing captured .50 caliber machine guns reveals truths that transcend specific weapons or historical periods. It demonstrates that engineering excellence must align with strategic reality. The Germans built magnificent general-purpose machine guns, but they never prioritized the heavy machine gun role that proved tactically decisive. It shows that recognizing enemy advantages doesn't automatically confer ability to counter them. German ordnance officers understood the .50 cal's superiority clearly, yet lacked resources to respond effectively. It proves that doctrine and technology must evolve, together. American heavy machine gun dominance emerged from tactical doctrine that prioritized sustained suppressive fire, not from superior metallurgy or secret innovations. Perhaps most significantly, the testing revealed the importance of commitment to specific design goals. The M2 Browning was not technologically revolutionary. It used conventional operating principles, standard materials, and familiar manufacturing techniques. Its superiority emerged from absolute commitment to a single mission: sustained heavy fire. Every design decision, every component specification, every engineering trade-off served that goal. The result was a weapon that excelled in its intended role to a degree that more theoretically versatile weapons could not match. The German engineers who tested that first captured 50 cal on the ranges at Kumerdorf in December 1942 were consummate professionals. Their reports documented what they observed with scientific objectivity, free from propaganda or nationalist bias. They recognized the American weapon's strengths honestly: exceptional reliability, sustained fire capability, devastating terminal effects, and elegant simplicity of operation. They identified its weaknesses fairly: excessive weight, limited portability, expensive manufacture, and inflexible deployment requirements. Their conclusion was unambiguous. For its intended purpose, the American heavy machine gun was superior to anything Germany had developed. That conclusion, documented in technical reports that survive in archives to this day, represented a kind of intellectual surrender that preceded military defeat. When your enemy's weapons work better, last longer, and hit harder than your own, when your engineers acknowledge this through careful analysis, when you lack the industrial capacity to close the gap, the ultimate outcome becomes inevitable, regardless of tactical brilliance or individual courage. The .50 caliber didn't win World War II. Single-handedly, obviously. No weapon system ever decides conflicts alone. But it represented the kind of thinking that did win the war. Identifying critical battlefield requirements, designing weapons optimized specifically for those requirements, accepting necessary trade-offs to achieve superiority in chosen roles, and producing those weapons in overwhelming quantities. The M2 was never the lightest machine gun, never the most portable, never the most flexible. It was simply the most effective sustained firepower weapon in its class, and on mid-20th century battlefields, that effectiveness mattered more than any theoretical advantage. Oberst Wilhelm Hauser, who first encountered that captured 50 cal on an Algerian beach in November 1942, survived the war. In a 1951 interview conducted for a British military history project, he reflected on that moment. "I had commanded machine gun companies since 1939. I knew our weapons intimately, believed in their superiority absolutely. That American gun on the beach looked crude, almost primitive compared to our MG-34s and 42s. But after the testing, after reading the reports, I understood we had been wrong about many things. The Americans didn't build the most elegant machine gun, they built the most effective one. There's a profound difference. Elegance is what engineers admire. Effectiveness is what wins battles. We learned that distinction too late to matter." The weapon Hauser examined that November day still exists, or at least weapons identical to it still exist, serving in military arsenals nearly 8 decades later. The MG-42s that so impressed German forces are museum pieces, respected relics of engineering excellence, but obsolete in modern service. The contrast is instructive. The weapon that tried to do everything adequately has been replaced. The weapon that did one thing superbly remains relevant. For students of military history and engineering, the German testing of captured American .50 caliber machine guns offers enduring lessons. It demonstrates that tactical requirements should drive weapons design, not engineering preferences or doctrinal tradition. It proves that sustained operational effectiveness outweighs peak theoretical performance. It shows that logistical simplicity and industrial producibility are themselves forms of technical superiority. It reveals that honest assessment of enemy capabilities, while professionally admirable, provides little advantage without capacity to respond. The engineers and officers who conducted those tests were among the most technically competent military professionals of their era. They possessed exceptional training, extensive combat experience, and access to sophisticated testing facilities. Yet their careful analysis, their honest conclusions, their accurate predictions all proved strategically irrelevant because Germany lacked the industrial resources and strategic time to act on what they had learned. Knowledge without capability is merely frustration. The M2 Browning stands as a monument to design philosophy that prioritized mission effectiveness over engineering elegance. It was never beautiful in the way that finely crafted German weapons were beautiful. It was heavy, crude in appearance, expensive to manufacture, and inflexible in deployment. But when the mission required sustained heavy fire, when infantry needed positions suppressed, when vehicles needed to be stopped, when aircraft needed to be engaged, the 50 cal delivered with a reliability and effectiveness that no German equivalent could match. That reliability, that sustained effectiveness, was ultimately more valuable than any amount of theoretical versatility or mechanical elegance. The Germans learned this through careful testing and bitter experience. They documented it in technical reports that acknowledged American superiority in heavy machine gun design. They faced it on battlefields across 3 continents, where American 50 cals controlled terrain and dictated tactical options. The lesson was clear, consistent, and ultimately decisive. In the end, the story of German forces testing captured 50 caliber machine guns isn't primarily about a specific weapon. It's about the collision between different engineering philosophies, different industrial capabilities, and different strategic visions. The Germans built weapons as craft objects, pursuing mechanical sophistication and multi-role versatility. The Americans built weapons as industrial products, pursuing functional effectiveness and overwhelming availability. Both approaches produced excellent weapons, but they served different strategic contexts. Germany's approach made sense for a nation with limited industrial capacity, attempting to maximize utility from each manufactured weapon. America's approach made sense for a nation with vast industrial resources, seeking to dominate through overwhelming material superiority. In the specific context of World War II, American industrial capacity made their philosophy viable, while German resource limitations made their philosophy insufficient. The 50 cal embodied that American philosophy perfectly, a weapon designed for absolute effectiveness in its role, manufactured in staggering quantities, supported by limitless ammunition, and fielded so ubiquitously that American forces at every level possessed organic heavy firepower. German forces encountered this reality across every theater, tested, captured examples extensively, understood intellectually what they faced, yet could not respond effectively within their strategic constraints. Part 3. Extended Epilogue, 1,500 words. The legacy of that German testing program extended into domains few could have predicted during the war years. When NATO formed in 1949 and began standardizing equipment across member nations, the M2 Browning became one of the alliance's foundational weapons. The same German engineers who had tested captured 50 cals during the war found themselves, a decade later, training a new generation of German soldiers on American heavy machine guns. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Hauptmann Friedrich Keller, who had written some of the earliest technical assessments of the captured M2 at Kummerdorf, joined the Bundeswehr's Ordnance Evaluation Branch in 1956. In a 1962 article for a German military journal, Keller reflected on the strange circularity of his career. I spent months during the war documenting why the American 50 caliber outperformed our weapons. I wrote detailed reports explaining its advantages. Those reports were filed away, read by officers who could do nothing with the information. Now, 20 years later, I teach young German soldiers to maintain and operate the same weapon I once studied as an enemy system. The weapon hasn't changed. What changed was our understanding that effectiveness matters more than national pride in design. The captured 50 cals tested at Kummerdorf had revealed something that transcended immediate tactical concerns. They demonstrated that American industrial culture had produced a fundamentally different relationship between weapons and warfare. German military tradition viewed weapons as extensions of soldier skill, tools that enabled trained professionals to execute complex tactics. The finest German weapons, from the Mauser rifle to the MG-42, rewarded expertise and punished incompetence. The American 50 cal represented a different philosophy entirely. It was designed to be effective in the hands of minimally trained soldiers. The controls were simple, almost crude. The operating procedure was straightforward enough that fresh recruits could master it in hours rather than weeks. The weapon's mass and robust construction meant that even clumsy handling rarely caused damage. This wasn't a tool for craftsmen. It was a tool for an industrial army composed of citizen soldiers who would serve briefly then return to civilian life. German military theorists in the 1950s and 60s studied this distinction intensively. Professor Wilhelm Müller-Hillebrand, a former Wehrmacht general staff officer who became a prominent military historian, argued in his 1968 book, German Tank Forces in World War II, that American weapons design reflected democratic values translated into steel. A weapon like the 50 caliber, Müller-Hillebrand wrote, assumes that ordinary citizens called to military service can be effective soldiers with minimal training. It democratizes violence by making heavy firepower accessible to common troops rather than reserving it for specialized units. German weapons tradition assumed a professional military with extensive training. When forced to mobilize millions of civilians, our complex weapons became liabilities. The Americans designed for the army they had, not the army they wished for. This insight had profound implications for Cold War military planning. The Bundeswehr, NATO's frontline force facing the Warsaw Pact, needed weapons that conscripts could operate effectively during their brief service periods. Complex weapons requiring extensive training became luxuries that modern militaries, increasingly dependent on short-term conscripts rather than long-service professionals, could no longer afford. The 50 caliber's enduring service reflected this reality. It remained effective precisely because it had never demanded exceptional skill to operate effectively. The testing data from Kumerdorf, declassified in the 1970s, became required reading at military academies worldwide. The reports documented not just technical specifications but a case study in how engineering philosophy shapes battlefield outcomes. Students at West Point, Sandhurst, and St. Cyr analyzed the same data that German engineers had and compiled, learning identical lessons about the relationship between design priorities and tactical effectiveness. Soviet weapons designers learned parallel lessons through their own captured equipment studies. The Deuce heavy machine gun, adopted in 1938, shared the 50 cal's philosophy: heavy, simple, and optimized for sustained fire. Soviet designers had reached similar conclusions independently, recognizing that industrial warfare demanded weapons that prioritized reliability over sophistication. The convergence wasn't coincidental. Industrial warfare imposed certain requirements that transcended ideology or national tradition. By the 1980s, when the Cold War entered its final decade, the basic heavy machine gun design pioneered by John Browning remained essentially unchanged after 60 years. The M2A1 variant introduced minor improvements, a quick-change barrel system, simplified headspace adjustment, but the fundamental operating system remained identical to the 1933 original. Meanwhile, the weapons that had competed against it during World War II had all vanished from service. The German MG-42 evolved into the MG-3, an excellent weapon but serving different roles. The Soviet DSK gave way to the NSV. Yet, the 50 cal endured, manufactured continuously across 8 decades. The weapon appeared in conflicts that John Browning could never have imagined. It served on Korean hilltops and Vietnamese fire bases. It protected convoys in Iraqi deserts and Afghan mountains. Each generation of soldiers learned the same loading procedures, the same immediate action drills, the same techniques for sustaining fire that German test crews had documented at Kumerdorf in 1942. The manual, updated periodically, contained procedures nearly identical to those captured German engineers had translated from American documents 80 years earlier. This extraordinary longevity stemmed directly from the design philosophy that German testing had identified. The M2 was overbuilt to the point of near indestructibility. Its simple operating system tolerated abuse that would destroy more refined weapons. its sustained fire capability remained relevant across changing tactical doctrines. Most significantly, its basic effectiveness in delivering heavy fire never became obsolete because the fundamental requirement suppressing enemy positions with sustained accurate fire never changed. Modern militaries have attempted repeatedly to replace the 50 cal with more advanced systems. The United States explored caseless ammunition, electronic ignition, and various exotic propellants. Each program eventually concluded that the improvements didn't justify replacing millions of existing weapons that still performed their mission adequately. The same calculation that made the M2 effective in 1942 that sustained reliability outweighs marginal performance improvements continues to keep it in service today. The German testing program's most enduring contribution may be its documentation of how honest technical assessment can coexist with strategic failure. The engineers at Kummersdorf performed exemplary work. Their reports were thorough, objective, and accurate. They identified every significant advantage the American weapon possessed. They recommended responses that would have improved German capabilities. Yet none of it mattered strategically because Germany lacked the industrial capacity and time to implement changes. This pattern repeats throughout military history. Competent professionals identify problems correctly, propose reasonable solutions, yet fail to influence outcomes because strategic constraints override tactical insights. The German 50 cal testing stands as a particularly well-documented example of this frustrating dynamic. The knowledge was there, the understanding was complete, the capability to respond was absent. For modern military planners, this offers a sobering lesson. Technical superiority, even when clearly identified and thoroughly understood, provides advantage only if you possess the industrial and logistical capacity to exploit it. The Germans knew the 50 cal was superior by late 1942. That knowledge bought them nothing. The Americans might have known less about the technical details, but they had the industrial might to produce 50 cals in overwhelming numbers, and that mattered more than any amount of sophisticated analysis. The story comes full circle in contemporary photographs of German soldiers in Afghanistan, manning defensive positions equipped with American M2 Brownings. The great-grandsons of Wehrmacht soldiers who faced 50 caliber fire in North Africa and France now depend on the same weapon for their own protection. The design that once represented enemy technological superiority has become part of Germany's own defensive capability, testament to its enduring effectiveness. That captured M2, serial number 1734928, that Oberst Hauser discovered on an Algerian beach in 1942, likely no longer exists. It was probably destroyed in the final chaotic months of the war, scrapped during post-war reconstruction, or simply lost in the vast redistribution of military equipment after 1945. But the knowledge it generated, the lessons German engineers learned through meticulous testing, that legacy endures in military doctrine, engineering philosophy, and weapons design priorities that continue shaping how modern nations prepare for war. The 50 cal taught German engineers that simplicity can be sophisticated, that reliability is its own form of excellence, that sustained effectiveness trumps peak performance, and that democratic industrial powers could produce weapons as formidable as anything created by traditional military establishments. These weren't lessons Germany wanted to learn, but they were lessons the testing program documented with undeniable clarity. 8 decades later, that heavy Browning machine gun continues its service, outlasting the regime that tested it, the engineers who studied it, and the entire geopolitical order that existed when it first entered service. It remains, improbable and unchanged, a monument to the idea that good enough, produced in sufficient quantity and maintained reliably, defeats perfect every time. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.